Welcome. This is Yael Shimoni from Yeshivat Drisha, and I'm very happy to share with you our Gefet, Gemara, Perush, Rashi, and Tosafot, a weekly shiur that's been given Yeshivat Drisha and Hadran Badaf Yomi, teaching together Gemara a little bit more in depth in order to give the limud of Daf Yomi another step forwards in the world of Gemara. So we're continuing learning Sukkah together. We did one shiur last week, and this is our second shiur on Sukkah. We're in Daf Tetvav and Tetzayin, and we're going to be dealing with another philosophical idea, raising in the Gemara, an idea coming about in Tosafot. Tosafot will be discussing a halachic situation that even if I, as a personal person, think something, what I think doesn't matter. Why? Because most of the people of the world think differently. We will check this idea, בטלה דעתו של אדם, אצל דעת כל אדם, and we will learn with the Tosafot that this idea that what I think doesn't matter is not always true. Sometimes even my personal thoughts will have a meaning halachically, even though the entire world thinks against me. So let's see how this idea comes about in our Gemara, Daf Tetvav and Tetzayin. Let's begin. We start in the Mishna in Daf Tetvav. The Mishna says, "המקרא סוכתו בשיפודים או בארוכות המיטה, אם יש ריווח ביניהם כמותם כשרה." The Gemara says that if I use shipudim or arukot amita to use them as a sachach, I cannot use them as a schach if they're brought in together, one next to the other. If they're just part of the sukkah, like we usually do, we have wood in the sukkah, and then we add on top of that our sachach, that's fine. But if there is no distance between the parts on top of the sukkah, that will mean that the sukkah is pasul. So let's look a moment at this Mishnah. The first idea to use shipudim as a schach doesn't make sense to us. Why? Shipudim are made out of steel and they're used for cooking. So I definitely understand I cannot use them as schach because they're not from the ground. They're not psolet, goren, veyakev. I cannot use them as schach. That's fine. But why arukot amita? Why is that a problem? So let's look at arukot amita and understand what that is. Arukot amita means I have a bed. My bed is made out of wood, and the bed has a long side of it and a short side of it. The long part of the bed, if I take the bed apart, I can use these pieces in order to build with them a sukkah. That's arukot amita, the long side of the bed. Why is there a problem using the long side of the bed as schach? It's a piece of wood, right? So a piece of wood is fine. Wood comes from the earth. I can use it as sachach. Why is that a problem? So we've already learned that there is another problem in sachach. Not only does it have to come from the ground, it also has to be something that does not mekabel tuma. What is something that is not mekabel tuma? If something is a kli, which means humans already used it as something, then it's a kli and it's mekabel tuma. If I want to use it, I have to take it out of the name of kali. So I had a bed. The bed is made out of wood. When the wood was in the factory and it wasn't a bed yet, I could have taken that wood and use it to be the schach of my sukkah. Why? Wood is from the ground and it's not kli. But the minute I took this wood and I created a bed out of it, boom, it became a kli. I cannot use it in my sukkah anymore. Wait 1 minute. But if I took the bed apart and now it's no longer a bed, is this piece of wood a kli or not a kli? As far as we know from Ilchot Tumah v'Tahara, it's not a kli anymore. It used to be a kli and now it's not a kli anymore. So why can't I use it as a schach for the sukkah? I understand the Mishnah, half of it. המקרא סוכתו בשיפודים או בארוכות המיטה, אם יש ריווח ביניהם כמותם כשרה. I can understand it in the Shipudei Matechet, but why is there a problem to use the pieces of wood that were a bed once as something that cannot be schach? Big problem. Let's continue. The Gemara asks, how can that be? Why does the Mishnah think there is a problem in these pieces of wood? They used to be a bed, they're not a bed no longer. Says the Gemara the following. Leima Messiah le Rabbi Ami bar Tavyumi. דאמר רבי עמי בר תביומי, שיחך בבלעי כלים פסולה. The Gemara says, maybe this Mishnah is according to what Rabbi Ami bar Tavyumi thinks. Rabbi Ami bar Tavyumi thinks that using pieces of X kelim is also a problem in the sukkah. Sechacha beblaei kelim pesula. What does Rabbi Ami say to me? He says to me, Yael, you're absolutely right. According to Deraita, according to the din of the Torah, this bed was problematic when it was a bed. Now you took it apart. It is no longer chayav mikabel tuma. That is true. But I'm telling you, I also have a problem with that. What's the problem? Why does Rav Abi bar Tavyumi think that if I took the bed apart and it's blaei kelim, I cannot use it as chach? It's not mikabel tuma. Rashi comes and saves us and helps us and explains the following. Blaei kelim, says Rashi, לקמן מפרש במטליות שאין בהן 3 על 3. דאף על גב דהשתא לא מקבלי טומאה, כיוון דמחלי עטו, גזור ברבנן. ארוכות נמי, השתא לא מקבלי טומאה, דלא חזה למידי, אלא מכלי כעטו. Says Rashi, Rav Ami bar Tavyumi thinks that there is a rovet derabanan and there is a deraita. According to the rule of deraita, there is no problem in these pieces of wood because they're no longer a kli. Rav Ami bar Tavyumi thinks that there is a gezerah derabanan using things that were ex kelim. And Rashi says, you will meet Rav Ami bar Tavyumi soon. Rav Ami bar Tavyumi did not talk about pieces of wood in the bed. He talked about small pieces of cloth. Cloth is not like a bed. A bed is a kli, and then you take it apart, then the pieces of wood, doesn't matter how big they are not mekabel tuma. Piece of cloth has no actual meaning as a kli, but we look at it as a kli because it's something that humans have created. However, if it's very, very small, a small piece of cloth, 3 על 3, it's not mekabel tuma because it's too small. Rav Ami bar Tavyumi thinks that you cannot take these small patches of cloth and use them as chach for sukkah. So explains to us Rashi the same idea with these small pieces of cloth, which are no longer kli. That's the same idea in the bed, and that is a gezerah derabana. So what have we done up till now? We've read the Mishnah. We saw there's a problem in the Mishnah. We saw the Gemara is offering us an answer. We couldn't understand the answer, and Rashi helped us. Rashi explained so far. Deraita, something is only mekabel tuma if it's kli. From the Rabbanan, if something was a kli and was able to be mekabel tuma, even though now it's not mekabel tuma, still you're not allowed to use it as sachach. Mi derabanan. Chachamim told us not to do that. The only thing is Rashi did not explain why. Why did Chachamim make this new rule? These are too many rules. I understand it has to be from the earth. I understand it has to be the mekabel tuma. But now it's not mekabel tuma. Why are Chachamim coming saying, no, Yael, Rav Ami bar Tavyumi says, no, Yael, you can't use these pieces of wood. You can't use these pieces of cloth. Why? It's fine. It's not mekabel tuma. What's the problem? So Rashi is not answering us. We will use the Rambam who gives us an answer. Why is this gezerah in existence? So the Rambam in Ilchot Shofar V'Sukkah B'Lulav Perek Hei Halacha Bet says the following. וכן אם שיחכה בשברי כלים ובליותיהם פסולה, הואיל והיו מקבלים טומאה, שמא ישחק בשברים שעדיין לא טהרו. Says the Rambam, Yael, when you meet a piece of wood, and you can recognize it used to be a bed once, there is one thing that you don't know for sure. Maybe when this piece of wood was still part of the bed, maybe this bed was mekabel tuma. You don't know the bed. You don't know the history of this piece. You will use it, but it might be tameh, and you're not allowed to use something that is tameh to be a schach of your sukkah. So since you don't know that for sure, I'm afraid there'll be mistakes. You'll think you're fine. You think you're taking these pieces of wood, you're taking them from the garbage, you think you're wonderful. But in this garbage, there might be pieces that are already tameh. So that is why Chachamim came and said, even though when you took it apart, it's not a kli anymore, that is true if this piece of wood was never tameh when it was a kli. But if it would have been tameh, then you won't be able to know, and you will be using accidentally pieces of wood which are tameh for your sechach, and that's why Chachamim came and said, don't use these pieces, shema, you'll make a mistake. So up till now, we've read Mishnah, Gemara, Rashi, and we understood Rashi. Mishna said there's a problem with pieces of wood that used to be a bed. We did not understand why. Rav Ami Bar Manumi said it was a din de Rabbanan, so explained Rashi. And Rambam explained it's because of Dinei Tumah V'Tara, which is a whole world that I don't know if you've known about. So we'll just sum it up again. A piece of wood is fine in the factory. When I build a bed out of it, it can become something that is mukhshar lekabel tuma. If I take it apart, it becomes a piece of wood again. However, if it was a bed and it became tameh, even if I took it apart, it is still tameh, and that is why I'm afraid of the pieces of wood that I find in the street, because I do not know their history. So up till now, we've learned Mishnah, Gemara, Rashi, and Rambam. Let's continue to learn the Tosafot, because Tosafot is the one who's interesting for us, as I opened in the first place. So we continue to Tosafot, and Tosafot writes on this passage in the Gemara. The Gemara says in Daf Dezayin, Gufa. Gufa means let's deal with the thing itself. We had this Meima of Rav Ami Bar Tavimi. We want to understand what did Rav Ami Bar Tavimi say and what is the problem. So, Gufa. Amar Rav Ami Bar Tavimi, Sichecha beblaei kelim pesula. Mai blaei kelim? Amar Abaye, matloniyot she'en behem 3 על 3, דלא חזיין, לא לעשירים ולא לעניים. So we've explained part of this before, but I will repeat it and we'll learn what Abaye says to us here, which is very, very interesting. Rav Ami Bar Tavimi said a piece of cloth, which used to be a whole cloth, is pasul. Says the Gemara, what is this blaei kelim? What is this X cloth? How do you become an X cloth? Says Abaye, a small piece of cloth. Matloniot, small piece. She'en behem 3 על 3, only 3 on 3 fingers. That's a very, very small piece of cloth. It's like this size, approximately. That is not a piece of cloth anymore. It's nothing. It's a piece of garbage. Why, says Abaye? Why is that a piece of garbage? דלא חזיין, לא לעשירים ולא לעניים. Rich people cannot use such a small piece of cloth because they're rich, but also poor people will not use such a small piece of cloth. No one in the world will use this piece of cloth. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but personally, I'm an artist, and I use all kinds of things that people don't usually use. That is true. Rich people don't use this thing. Poor people don't use this thing, but some people are just crazy, and they take all kinds of pieces of stuff, and they make it into something else. And Abaye said, it's not a kli. A small piece of cloth is not a kli. Says the Tosafot, how can that be if Yael Shimoni comes and decides to take the small piece of cloth and use it? Is it not a piece of cloth? It's not mekabel tuma? Let's see what Tosafot says. Tosafot says the following. דלא חזי לא לעשירים ולא לעניים, ואפילו חישב עליהם בטלה דעתו. Says Tosafot to me, Yael, what you think is not interesting, because most of the world will not use this piece of cloth. Not the ashirim and not the aniyim, not the rich people, not the poor people. Even if you decide to use this piece of cloth as a kli, it makes no difference. Halachically, I do not view it as a kli. I'm repeating. Why do I care if something is a kli or not? If it's a kli, it's mekabel tuma. If it's not a kli, it's not mekabel tuma. If I have a very small piece of cloth, says Abaye, it will never be mekabel tuma. Why? Because rich people don't use it and poor people don't use it. And Tosafot here explained to us, even if you decide to use it, even if you want to be a very special artist and to take very, very small bits of cloth and keep them in your closet because you are planning a whole piece of art to create from them, it doesn't matter. These pieces, even though you collected them and you put them in a small bag and you think that they're wonderful, they're still not a kli. As far as we're concerned, they're nothing. So that's a very interesting statement of the Tosafot, and that's a philosophical idea. We don't care what you think, we care what the world thinks. So I don't know what you think about this. Does my thought have absolutely no meaning? Let's keep this idea on the side, because that's what's interesting for us. And we'll continue learning the Tosafot, because the Tosafot in the continuation says another very interesting and important statement. First of all, the Tosafot continues and states that there is a stira between this sugya and another sugya. Here, Abaye told us that what I think doesn't matter, because if rich people and poor people don't want to use this piece of cloth, it's nothing. But in a different place says the Tosafot, Abaye says something exactly opposite. So in order to understand the Kushiyah of the Tosafot, we will first open the Gemara where the Tosafot finds the Kushiyah. Where will we open? Continues the Tosafot and says, V'ha de mashma bezvachim perik dam chatat, daf tzadik daled amud aleph. Let's look at Zvachim, daf tzadik daled amud aleph, and see what's written there in the Gemara and why is it a problem. So Tosafot sent me to read another Gemara. That's something that a Tosafot does a lot of time. Tosafot took the entire Shas and created a whole world out of it. When the Tosafot is reading Sukkah, he's also reading Zvachim. Do you know how they did that, the Tosafot? They had different Talmidim, learned different Masechtot, and each Talmid knew the entire Masechta by heart. So when they were learning Sukkah, all the other people said, oh, wait, this doesn't work with this Masechet, this doesn't work with this Masechet, and this is how the Tosafot created this beautiful work of art of learning one piece of Gemara according to another piece of Gemara. So Tosafot here says that our sugya is contradicting the sugya in Zavachim. What's written in Zavachim? Zavachim, there's an interesting rule. I'm in the Mikdash and I have all kinds of pieces of cloth and they're shechting animals to become chatat. If a piece of blood stains a piece of cloth, the cloth becomes tameh, and it needs to be cleaned from the dam. It has to be mechubas. That's what the Matnitin says. Nitaz ala or ad shelo ufshat eno taun chibus, misheufshat taun chibus, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Elazar omer af misheufshat eno taun chibus, אלא מקום הדם. ודבר שהוא ראוי לקבל טומאה וראוי לחיפוש, אחד הבגד ואחד השק ואחד האור, טעונים כיבוס. There is a machlokes here between Tana Kama and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says something that did not become already a piece of cloth does not have to be cleaned and is not tameh. Only the area of the blood will become tameh, not the entire piece. And according to Tana Kama, any piece of cloth or of animal that took a piece of blood will have to be mechabes in the same way. That's a machloket here in the Mishnah. The Gemara says, okay, I understand it's a machloket, a very interesting machloket. Is there a piece of cloth that is really showing us that Rabbi Yehuda will say it's tameh and Tana Kama will say it's tahor? Is there a piece of cloth that we can actually see the machloket? What's the nafka mina? My benayu. Says Abaye, matlit pchuta mishalosh ika benayu. Man de'amar rahui, hanami raui. De'i baye chashiv alea. Man de'amar davar hamekabel tumah, mi alav bat kibulei tumah hi. Explains to us Rashi, my benayu, where will we see this machloket between Tanaka and Rabbi Yehuda? We have to find a piece of cloth that is exactly in the middle. A piece of cloth which is very, very small, 3 on 3. On one hand, it's not mekabel tumah. Why? It's not cloth anymore. On the other hand, if a person will consider it a piece of cloth, it will be mekabel tumah. And that's what Abaye tells us here. Matlit pchuta mishalosh ika benayu. Man de'amar raui, hanami raui. Di bai chashiv alai. Man de'amar davar hamekabel tumah, hamia alav bat kibulei tumahi. So Tosafot send us here, and now we have to see, why is this a problem? Okay, Abaye in our sugya described the small piece of cloth, and Abaye in this sugya also described the small piece of cloth. Abaye, the same person, is talking about the same piece of cloth. Is he saying different things in Sukkah and in Zavachim? So let's look closely. Yes, there is a contradiction. In Sukkah, Abaye said, if a piece of cloth is so small, it will never be able to be kli again. As long as it's just a piece and you did not connect it together to bigger pieces, it is not mekabel tumah, and it doesn't matter, Yael, if you want to keep it for your work of art. It doesn't matter. Your thought, you don't care about it. That's Abaye in Sukkah. Keivan de lo chazei la'ashirim ve'aniyim. But in Zavachim, Abaye said, this piece of cloth, if you think about it, will be able to be mekabel tumah. Man de'amar ra'ui hanami ra'ui de'i bai chashiv alei. So this is a contradiction. In zvachim, a small piece of cloth is something that is considered to be a kli if I think about it. And in sukkah, this piece of cloth is not a kli even if I think about it. That's really a contradiction. And it's the same person. Abaye in sukkah says, I don't care about your thoughts, Yael. And Abaye in zvachim says, I care about your thoughts, Yael. About the same thing, this small piece of cloth. So do I care about my personal thoughts or don't I? What does Abaye think? I'm totally confused. Says the Tosafot. No, Yael. There is a reason why Abaye thinks in Sukkah there is no problem, in Zvachim there is a problem. Because in Zvachim, we're not talking about you taking this piece of cloth and thinking about it. It means taking this piece of cloth and putting it in a special area to use it as something to fix your cloth. You didn't only think, you actually did a deed. And in the words of Tosafot, Behatam machshavato nikeret mitoch ma'asav. Let's understand this. This is very deep in the Tosafot. The Tosafot says, I have this. Look at what I'm doing. I'm thinking, do you know what I thought about this tissue? No idea, right? Because it's only in my head. In this case, says Tosafot, I don't care about your thoughts. That's sukkah. But if I take this piece and I say, and I fold it and I putting it here in a special place that also has all kinds of other utensils to use it as something to fix my trousers, then it's not only my thoughts. Everybody understands that I really am planning on using this piece of cloth for something. That does work. So Tosafot explained to us that there are two different ways of thinking about life. I can think about life only in my head. I'm looking at the world, I'm looking at people, many thoughts in my head. That is something very weak, says the Tosafot. Your thoughts don't matter. Only the thoughts of the whole world matter, or of all the rich people, or of all the poor people. Thoughts do matter, but not thoughts of a specific person. But, says the Tosafot, if I add to my specific thought also an action, and it's not only in my head, it's also in the worlds of deeds, then my personal thoughts will make a halachic difference. So philosophically, we've learned something very, very deep and important in the Tosafot. Thoughts do matter. Thoughts of a specific person do matter, but only if you add a deed to your personal thoughts. So what can we do with this Tosafot philosophically? If you have your own individual thoughts and you go against what the world thinks, you should remember that it makes a very big difference if these thoughts are only in your head or if you actually do deeds to show them. If they're only in your heads, it might be interesting for you, but it doesn't make any halachic difference. But if you've actually done a deed to show your personal thoughts, these thoughts will make a dent, a halachic dent in the world. So let me sum up. Today, we've learned Gemara, Rashi, and Tosafot. In the Mishna and in the Gemara, we saw that a piece of wood has a history and a piece of cloth has a history. If it used to be part of a kli, you cannot use it as a schach. That was the first part of what we've learned according to the Gemara, the Mishna, Rashi, and Rambam. Then we continued to the Tosafot and we saw that if I have this piece of nothing in my hand, it makes a very big difference if I think about it, personal thoughts in my head, or if I think about it and actually do something with my thoughts. If I only think about it that it's important to me, that doesn't make any halachic difference. It will not be considered an important piece of cloth or an important piece of wood. But if I think it's important and I actually take it and do a deed regarding to it, even though I did not create a big cloth out of it, it will become a kli, also halachically. And my personal thoughts, even though it's my own, will make a halachic difference in the world. So thank you for joining us in Gefet today and in learning a little bit more in depth this whole idea of sukkah and the interesting thoughts that the world of Tuma and Tara and of thought and of deed helps us learn about the world and about the Torah's view of the world. Litraot in our next Gefet next week.